Why has thyroid disease become so prevalent? And why has it become so prevalent among midlife women? If you're wondering if you have a thyroid issue, you already know you have a thyroid issue, and you're working on potentially decreasing medications wherever you can and wonder what you can do to help support your thyroid function. This episode is just for you. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top struggles and concerns, and I share what to eat, how to move, and how to change your mindset so that you can have the energy and the vitality that you and I want, need, and we deserve in this second and better half. And today we're really talking all about thyroid and from both sides, how you can prevent it, because we talk about the layers of thyroid dysfunction and where you might be and not necessarily suspect it. And also, if you're here and you already have a known thyroid issue, you may pick up some tidbits that can help you where you are right now. So, before we dive into this episode, just want you to know this episode is brought to you by the Flipping 50 Menopause Fitness Specialist. It's meant for trainers and for health coaches who work with women in menopause, any stage, perimenopause, right through the change, or postmenopause, and help them develop muscle, keep their bones strong, and work on mindset about aging. Because, girlfriend, you and I are doing it in a way that lays a foundation that we've never, ever seen a model for before. And that means we'll bump into our own resistance at certain times, and we'll have external resistance as well. We need coaches and we need trainers who can help you change your expectations. So if you know a trainer, you know a coach, or you are one, I'll put the link in the show notes so you can go and check it out. Well, let's dive in to this episode. My guest is Dr. Peter Kozlowski. As a functional medicine doctor, he uses a broad array of tools to find the source of the body's dysfunction. He takes the time to listen to patients, plots their history on a timeline, and considers what makes them unique and co-creates with them a truly individualized care plan. Currently, he works with patients online and in person via his Chicago, Illinois, and Bozeman, Montana based offices. Dr. Kozlowski did his residency in family practice, but started training in functional medicine as an intern. He trained in the clinics with leaders in his field, including well known Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Deepak Chopra, and Susan Blum. Dr. Kozlowski, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
All right. This is a topic that so many of our listeners are curious about. I'm going to guess that almost every listener is either conscious or wondering if she should blame it or already dealing with it and always gathering more information. So I'm so glad we're talking thyroid function, thyroid disease, and all things thyroid. So first of all, I do want to ask why is it that thyroid disease has become so prevalent? Because I remember my mom, and she was probably my age, maybe a little bit older. At midlife, is it more common? And is it more common for people now in 2021 as it is, or the end, than it was 10 or 20 or more years ago?
So I think it's definitely just like kind of all autoimmune and chronic diseases, it's definitely increasing. Um, my mentor when it comes to thyroid health is Dr. Susan Blum. She wrote a book on her own battle with Hashimoto's a number of years ago. And so that's kind of where I really honed in on the thyroid. And the best way that I would describe the thyroid is it is like a sponge and it absorbs all the toxins that we're being exposed to. So we're being exposed to heavy metals, mold, all the things in our food, genetically modified organisms, stress. One study says that we're exposed to 60,000 different like invaders a day. And we have a bunch of mechanisms to keep them out: our skin, our lungs, and our gut. And what, unfortunately, because of like the severe attack that we're under, those things can get in, the too many toxins will get into the body. And one of their favorite places to go is the thyroid. And so for me, that's the way I conceptualize the thyroid, is like a sponge for all these environmental issues that we're being exposed to. And so when now, and even something like gluten is another one that really attacks, can alter the thyroid. So when it's under this constant attack, and what happens, I mean, the most common thing that happens with thyroid is autoimmune disease of the thyroid, which basically means that your immune system has lost its tolerance for itself. So your immune system is supposed to identify what's good and what's bad. And in general, what's good is your own cells and your own tissues. And what autoimmune disease of the thyroid, like Hashimoto's or Graves', is when the immune system has identified the thyroid as an invader and it attacks. And it's my theory that the reason that's happening is because the thyroid is absorbing up all these different toxins, and it's making it more inflamed and look like more of a problem to the immune system.
What about midlife women? So, most of our listeners are somewhere between 45 and 70. And those of you who are outliers, a little bit younger and a little bit older, you are still welcome. So, stay put. But what is it about midlife women? So, obviously, we know there's a lot of chaos that happens with hormones, and there can be a roller coaster there. How much does that play a part?
I think it definitely plays a part. And part of it is just the increasing burden, right? We call it kind of like our toxic load.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you're increasing in age, your bucket, as I like to call it, of, or your toxic load is filling up more and more over the years. And then you take like a stressor, like going through menopause or something like that, and it can put it, kind of make that bucket overflow, and that's when disease can present. In general, though, there's so many factors that play a role. It seems like traditional medicine is very focused on like one cause equals one thing. And in my experience, it's usually a combination of these factors that cause disease to kind of take over.
So, thyroid, as you're painting it, of course, is a part of the whole picture. So, can it be diagnosed and treated too soon if other things aren't first looked at? I mean, if there's a domino effect that falls, and thyroid isn't the first, it's maybe the second or the third thing, is it smarter then to treat right away, to look at what else caused this and what can we do about that first?
I always try to treat the underlying causes first. So that's kind of like the basis of functional medicine.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting thing I think is that there's three kind of main hormone axes we look at. It's your adrenal glands, your thyroid, and then your reproductive hormones. And the symptoms between all three can look the same. So I just saw a patient this morning that's screaming thyroid disease to me. And she even has like a mildly elevated TSH that nobody really looked at before. But we're also going to be looking at her cortisol levels, and we're also looking at reproductive hormones. And so specifically, it's not, the classic symptoms of thyroid are things like fatigue, constipation, depression, weight gain, cold hands and feet, dry hair and skin, hair loss, menstrual irregularities, swelling, joint pain. A lot of those symptoms can overlap with a cortisol imbalance or with a reproductive hormone imbalance. So I really like to look at all the hormones before kind of trying to say that it's just the thyroid.
Mm-hmm.
And then, getting deeper into it and more into the functional medicine side even, is looking at the gut, looking at how digestion's working, because the thyroid really needs vitamins and minerals to work properly. And even if you're supplementing and you're eating a healthy diet, if you're not digesting and absorbing it, then it's not going to do you much good. I would want to look at food. I would want to look at for SIBO and toxins and stress. So I would look at a comprehensive picture. At the same time, I would probably, I always base my treatment decisions not only on numbers, but also on the individual. So, there's the ranges that we can get into of the different thyroid hormones and what's the right range and what should you treat. Um, but so if somebody's really low and really symptomatic, then I might put them on a thyroid replacement. But at the same time, start looking at all these other areas that I mentioned.
Great. And I want to back up, and I would like to talk a little bit about levels, or specifically we'll talk about different testing, because I think that's important. But you mentioned cortisol, and I think I want to look at this so for listeners can distinguish. So when you're saying, could be cortisol, we want to look at that as well. Are you looking for problems whether cortisol is too high and or too low at the wrong time?
So when we talk cortisol, the term that most people are familiar with is adrenal fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so most patients that come to me asking about adrenal fatigue assume they're basically like in stage 3 of adrenal fatigue, which is the exhaustion phase, which is the phase where the cortisol goes low.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, 99.9% of the patients, I only have had one patient that had like a flat line of cortisol. And so what that means is that, at least for me, for the people that I've seen, 99% of them are either in stage 1 or stage 2, which can be just elevated cortisol. It could be a mix of elevated and low cortisol. So it could be bouncing throughout the day. The way that I look at it is through saliva testing, tested in the morning, midday, afternoon, and bedtime, and it should follow a bell curve. And
Right.
so if you're not in that bell curve, and you're kind of all over the place, that's usually somewhere between stage 1 and stage 2, which is where I find the majority of people falling.
Yes. Yeah. And thanks for clarifying that. So we talk quite a bit about that. So as a functional health coach, that is also the kind of testing that I prefer to have for my clients. And I'm so glad you clarified that, because what I want for listeners to hear is stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, and there is a stage 4 is, really a point where, stage 1 and 2, many of you who are listening who are that I push through, maybe not listen to me because I've got so much else going on, you can be there. And if you're not listening to the signs and the symptoms of your own body as much as you might be listening to someone else's and what's happening for them in their lives, that could be, a step-by-step process. You could easily resurrect that, but you've got to experience some changes or apply them in order to do so. So let's talk about management of thyroid dysfunction. What do you recommend?
It depends on what we're dealing with. So
Mhm.
we can talk about the actual management of treating a low thyroid, or we can kind of get into the underlying causes, or maybe just with the testing and what we might do based on the testing.
Mhm.
So which way would you want to go first?
Let's talk about, how thyroid function can be improved without medication.
Okay.
So if you were suspecting it's not functioning well, what would you look at? But what would you have them do immediately?
So I would take a very, very functional medicine approach, and I would look at what does the body have too much of and what does the body not have enough of. So there's some major nutrients that support the thyroid. So that could be things that the body doesn't have enough of. So that's things like iron, iodine, zinc, selenium, B vitamins, vitamin D, fish oil, not enough exercise. So those are all factors that are needed for either the production of T4 or the conversion of T4 to T3. But at the same time, you can also be damaging your thyroid from working. And so, what do you have too much of? Stress, trauma, inflammation, environmental toxins like mold and heavy metals, uh, gut infections, just generalized infections, SIBO, dysbiosis. Um, that so honestly, it's not, I guess, that simple, but
Mm-hmm.
but you want, and to keep it simple, it's what does the body not have enough of? So you want to optimize the nutrients. And at the same time, we want to start identifying what is we have too much of. And through doing that, we can get the thyroid to kind of balance out.
Great list of nutrients. And I also want to remind listeners, so it wasn't just, are you getting enough of those and just randomly turning up the dial on those, but potentially testing so you know where you are now and what you're shooting for and how you want to close that gap, and that it's important that you're absorbing those vitamins. So the health of your gut is going to be an influence on that. Great answer. Thanks so much for that. So let's talk a little bit about testing. And this, I think, is where, at first pass, a lot of women still we're all covered by insurance, and we want to use that insurance, and we want to go to the doctor, and we want to ask them to test thyroid because we think that maybe our metabolism has slowed, and that's our first stop. What holes might you poke in the test results that you're going to get back?
So the biggest struggle that I think patients run into is trying to convince their doctor to order anything other than TSH. And and I just ran into that this morning with the patient I was working with. She couldn't get the doctor for years to order anything besides TSH. And so when I want to look at the thyroid, I also want to look at free T4, free T3, and if I already know there's some imbalance, that I'm also going to be looking at the thyroid antibodies like thyroid peroxidase antibodies and thyroglobulin antibodies. So that to me would be a full picture. A lot of practitioners in our field will order reverse T3 levels. I'm not a huge fan of that. We can talk about it. So that would be, the main thing that I see is, so the way that I really like it, I don't know if anybody's described the thyroid this way on your podcast, is it's like the heat in your house, and your pituitary gland in your brain is the thermostat, and your thyroid is the heater. And the thermostat sets a temperature for your thyroid levels. And when it detects those thyroid levels go low, it releases a signal to activate the thyroid. So that's what TSH is. It is the signal from the brain, from the pituitary gland to the thyroid to make more thyroid. So the thought process is elevated TSH means that the thyroid is underactive. And the range, so the typical range on a TSH is 0.4 to 4.5. We use a range of 0.4 to 2.5. The patient I was working with this morning, her levels by her doctor over a year ago were 3.5, and she was told that that was totally normal. I would have never ordered just a TSH. I would have at least ordered a free T4 and free T3 as well. But what I've seen over and over the years is normal TSH with a low T3 or a low T4 or both. Or I've seen people with an elevated TSH that have a normal T4 and T3. So those kind of people I wouldn't treat. And I'm really trying to focus on usually the T4 and T3, and then what are the symptoms.
Great description. Love it. Okay, let's talk about, with a functional test, so getting the whole panel and looking at what you're discussing. And there's also another phase to that. So when you get testing back, there's the interpretation of that test result, and there's norms. And a lot of times our listeners have been told, well, your labs are normal, so there's nothing wrong with you. and
Right.
yet they feel like, crap. So I
Like the
want
woman I
to
was working with this morning.
Yes, right. So there's norms and then there's optimal because norms have been derived at by testing a whole lot of people that don't feel very good. And that is not a good goal.
Right.
So the question I have for you that I've never asked on Flipping 50 is for functional interpretation, where do those optimal levels come from? How are those derived?
Um, Through, I think that's just the same kind of research that they came up with the kind of the ranges is just looking at symptoms compared to levels and looking at what is normal, compare or looking at what range people experience what symptoms or don't experience what symptoms. Um, I can tell you what we say are the optimal ranges, but at the end of the day, kind of what's even more important than any of that is how the person's feeling. Um, and so there are a lot of people that will just try to get the optimal numbers, right? Get a T4 that's between 1 and 1.5 and get a T3 that's between 3.2 and 4. But it really kind of plays a role in like how is the person feeling, in my opinion, for deciding what is optimal for that person.
Mm-hmm.
Even so that's where like we
Mm-hmm.
have the quote unquote optimal ranges in the functional medicine world, but to me, what's an optimal range is where the person feels good.
That's a great answer. And I want to ask you something, and I want to make sure that listeners hear this. So, if you're listening and maybe you've tuned out because you don't suspect you have a thyroid issue, and you're thinking, "Well, this isn't really for me. I'm not going to benefit from this." If you're feeling good right now, you're a woman in midlife who's feeling good, energy is good, but she's actually never tested. Would it be a good idea to have a baseline test now so that there is some kind of comparison if something does like go askew?
That's definitely something I wish that would happen, because like the most common question I get from people once we do the testing, we find the issue. They're like, well, when did this start? And I'm like, I have no idea, because we don't have a baseline, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if we had a baseline every year or whatever, then you can see, how it changes, and you can put together a better picture, a better timeline of where it started to go wrong. So I think you'd have a hard time getting your traditional doctor to do it, but I personally think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the more information we have, the more we can understand what's going on and we can help someone.
So, while I agree that it does make sense that a traditional doctor may not do that, but for the proactive listener who's working with a functional medicine doctor, or who wants to do self-directed testing, you know, is that then something you'd also look at if they've got a previous test where I was feeling good here, I did this self-directed test. Here's where my numbers are.
Yeah, I would definitely look at it, and we would definitely um, evaluate it. And I think it would be very helpful information, of to help figure out what's going on and why.
So good. All right. You mentioned several things that dietary wise or nutritionally impact thyroid function. So you mentioned iron levels. So we're talking in terms of testing, if we were going to look at that, would you look at ferritin, like serum ferritin levels, or what would you look at?
Yeah, my preferred test is ferritin.
Okay.
So the traditional medical like iron evaluation will look at like your iron binding capacity, your iron, the percent saturation, all these different numbers. Ferritin is how much iron is stored, and so that's actually my preferred number. And so when I'm looking at that, I shoot for a ferritin between 50 and 100. So if somebody's falling in the range, I believe on a ferritin test runs somewhere between like 20 and 230. So it's a very, very broad range. So again, we look for 50 to 100. It's also helpful to look at a CBC, because the main thing that kind of iron does is help you build blood. So if your hemoglobin and or hematocrit are lowered, pointing towards anemia, and the ferritin is low, that combination of things is good to know. So the two numbers that I would want to look at would be your just traditional CBC and ferritin levels.
Great. Good to know. Okay. And you also mentioned B12. The importance of selenium was one of the things I detected there.
Yeah.
One thing you didn't mention was, what about any disruption from sea salt? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, the toxins in salt would be the big problem, in my opinion. Um, and also there's the whole debate around how much iodine is right,
Yes.
and that's something that specifically there's practitioners that use high dose iodine, and I was taught from the early days that you have to be very careful. And so I max out someone if they want to supplement iodine at 150 micrograms a day. So that's a lot to me, but I've had patients that come in that were taking like 5 grams of iodine. And so that's like 5,000 times what I would put them on. And their thyroid was just like all over the place, like high, then low, and then high, just like ranging all over the place. And salts, there's table salt, which is super processed and super inflammatory and toxic, and so that's going to damage your thyroid. The salt, if you're going to be using it, should be a salt that was like naturally dried in the sun. So I typically recommend like rock salt from Utah, or pink Himalayan sea salt, as good salt options.
Okay, I'm going to back you up just for a second. So I think we may have confused listeners about iodine. So there is both maybe the philosophy of there can be too little iodine or there can be too much iodine, and both would impact the thyroid negatively. Am I right on that?
Yes, thank you for clearing that up.
Okay, no. So now I want you to clear up the next step. So how do I know which it is?
Testing. So urinary fasting morning, spot test is a good test for iodine. But and then also like you're not going to have too much. I don't think, I haven't seen it unless you're on like a high dose supplement. So if you're on a high dose supplement, if you've had a practitioner recommend it or you started it on your own, I would worry or at least test to make sure that it's not going too high.
Mhm.
And then same thing if you're there's iodine and salt. So most people are not deficient. It can happen. So there's nothing wrong with testing just to check in on that.
Okay, great. Very helpful. Okay. So, Doc Cause, just I had to throw that out. I was like, I got to use this at some point. Is there a question that we haven't really dug into as much as you'd like to, or a question that I should ask you while I've got you here as the expert that I haven't asked you yet?
When it comes specific to the thyroid,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
um, I would say, I mean, we have covered, I think maybe one thing we can cover, that people have probably heard quite a bit, and I don't know what your stance on it is, testing reverse T3. A lot of practitioners will use that as part of like a tradition, like as their whole profile. So, do you typically test that, or do you have an opinion on it?
And it's Doc Rock. So I actually would say that's probably outside of my scope.
Okay.
So I look at all the others that you mentioned, and at that point, I know that what I'm looking at as a health coach is just this is time to talk to a functional practitioner. I can make changes in an exercise program or daily lifestyle habits, but at that time, I want to recruit a team for that individual. So, for listeners, working with other health coaches, I think that's always wise. I'm
Yeah.
not trying to diagnose, just trying to make sure that because I see or talk to a client probably more than their physicians do, I'm in a position to help them know what to ask.
So there's been, I think, a lot of information out there about reverse T3, and to keep things super simple, your thyroid makes T4. The gland in your neck makes T4. And then that is converted peripherally into T3. But what can happen is that T4 could instead be converted to reverse T3. And so things that cause that are some of the things I mentioned, like toxins, pesticides, mercury, lead, celiac disease, gluten, stress, trauma. Those are all factors that can play a role in converting your T4 to your reverse T3. A lot of practitioners order that number. And so I've had a lot of patients come in like really kind of harping on a reverse T3. I typically like to only order tests that change my treatment plan. And a reverse T3 isn't going to change my treatment plan because I'm going to be looking for those kind of underlying issues anyway. So I'm going to be looking at toxins. I'm going to be looking at food and gluten and stress. And so that reverse T3 number doesn't play a huge role for me. I'm going to be looking at the T4 and T3 to decide whether we need supplementation, medication, or what. So that's just something I think that people might have come across that there's also kind of confusing information about. I don't find it like the most helpful number because unless it's helping guide you whether you want to test for toxins or gut health or food, but those are things that I'm going to be doing regardless.
Yeah, so very helpful. So, Doc Coz, where is the best place for listeners to get more of you and the expertise that you not only have on thyroid, but on all of the connected parts?
So my website is probably the best place, doc-coz.com. I've gotten on Instagram now and doc_Coz. My assistant's phone number is on our website. Her name's Jasmine. She's incredible. So people that have questions, they can call her and she'll help if people want to work with me. I just published a book this year called Unfunk Your Gut. And so that kind of goes into food and gut health and mental, emotional, spiritual health. And now I'm in the process of writing a second book on a combination of hormones and toxins. So hopefully by next year, I'll have that ready.
You're a busy guy. All right. Well, I thank you so much for your time and for the insight. Thyroid is always a topic our audience loves to hear about for optimal energy, optimal health, and hopefully we will chat again and look forward to sending people also to the resource. So I'll put a note. All the links to connect with Doc Coz will be below, including his website, his social media links, and his book where you can access that as well. So listeners, it's your turn. So is there a question that you wish I would have asked given I was in the hot seat trying to speak for all of us? You can leave that below the show notes at flipping50.com/why thyroid. And what are you waiting for? Let's start flipping 50 today.